At the exact moment when the priest asks if anyone objects to the marriage, the church doors open and she enters with two identical boys with blue eyes. The groom pales as he recognizes his own features in the children. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Rebecca Collins stood in the small antechamber of Trinity Church, her trembling fingers smoothing down the ivory satin of her wedding dress. The gown wasn't Vera Wang or Marchesa. It was a modest David's bridal creation she'd saved 6 months of tips to afford. Through the stained glass windows, Chicago's winter sunlight filtered in, casting kaleidoscope patterns that danced across the fabric. 5 minutes, Miss Collins, the wedding coordinator announced, barely glancing up from her clipboard. Rebecca nodded, swallowing the knot of anxiety in her throat. She caught her reflection in the antique mirror, cheeks flushed with anticipation, brown eyes bright with hope, dark hair arranged in an elegant updo that had cost her an entire day's wages at the Millennium Park Cafe. "You're marrying Ethan Montgomery," she whispered to herself, still hardly believing it. 8 months ago, he had walked into her cafe, immaculate in his tailored Armani suit, ordering a simple black coffee. Their eyes had met over the counter, and instead of treating her with the dismissive politeness she'd come to expect from Loop executives, he'd smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his startling blue eyes. "Cream?" she'd asked. "Life's too short for diluted experiences," he'd replied. That same evening, he'd returned at closing time, leaning against his BMW as she locked up. "I have reservations at Alinea," he'd said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to invite a cafe manager to Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. Their whirlwind romance had left her breathless. Weekend trips to New York on his private jet, champagne picnics along Lake Michigan, his proposal after only 4 months, presented with a 3-carat diamond that outweighed her rent. The door creaked open, pulling Rebecca from her memories. Her best friend Lisa peeked in, already dressed in her maid-of-honor gown. "Everyone seated," Lisa said, her expression oddly guarded. "The Montgomerys have filled the first 10 rows. I don't think I've ever seen so many Rolexes in one place." Rebecca laughed nervously. "And my side?" Lisa's smile softened. "Your co-workers came, all of them." 7 people. 7 to match the 200 members of Chicago's elite that Ethan had invited. Rebecca pushed down the pang of awareness. Being an orphan who'd worked her way through community college meant smaller weddings, but after today, she'd have a family again. "It's time," the coordinator announced. The processional music swelled as Rebecca took her first steps down the aisle. The cathedral's vastness emphasized her solitude. No father to escort her, no extended family beaming from the pews. She clutched her bouquet tighter, focusing on Ethan waiting at the altar, tall and commanding in his tuxedo. As she passed the front rows, she noted the appraising glances from women in Chanel suits and men with signet rings. A silver-haired woman leaned toward her companion, whispering something that made them both smirk. Rebecca lifted her chin higher, forcing her smile to remain intact. 3 more steps. 2. 1. She reached Ethan's side, looking up with all the love she'd carried these past months. But Ethan wasn't smiling. His jaw was rigid, his blue eyes, the ones that had captivated her that first day, cold as the January air outside. "Dearly beloved," the minister began. Ethan stepped back. The minister faltered. "I can't do this," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. Rebecca's heart stuttered. "Ethan?" He adjusted the silk tie at his neck, a reflexive gesture that seemed obscenely casual against the devastation of his next words. "Sinto muito, Rebecca," he said, then quickly corrected himself from the Portuguese he sometimes used when stressed. I'm sorry. I've made a mistake in thinking this would work." The bouquet slipped from her fingers, white roses scattering across the polished marble floor. "What are you saying?" she whispered, aware of 200 sets of eyes witnessing her unraveling. Ethan's voice hardened. You'll never be enough for my position in society." The words hit like physical blows. Rebecca staggered slightly. "You're just a waitress from the suburbs with aspirations beyond your class," he continued mercilessly. "My family needs someone who understands our world. You'd be a burden to my future, a stain on the Montgomery name." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Someone, perhaps his mother, called, "Ethan, that's enough." But he wasn't finished. "I thought I could overlook your background. I was wrong." Rebecca stood frozen, her mind unable to process the public execution of all her dreams. The pitying looks from his family's side, people whose acceptance she'd craved, weighed like lead on her shoulders. Without another word, Ethan turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the cathedral. The exit of a man who'd never intended to stay. Whispers erupted. Cell phones emerged from designer purses, documenting her humiliation for social media. Rebecca looked around wildly, catching Lisa's horrified expression, the shock on her co-workers' faces, the barely concealed satisfaction on some of the society women's features. Gathering the remains of her dignity like the tatters of a destroyed dream, Rebecca turned and ran. Down the aisle that should have led to her happily ever after, past the pews filled with strangers who'd come to witness a society wedding and instead got a spectacle. Outside, snowflakes kissed her bare shoulders as she stumbled down the church steps. No coat, no purse, nothing but a wedding dress she could never return, and a heart that felt beyond repair. A taxi stopped at her frantic wave. The driver's eyes widened at her appearance, but he mercifully asked no questions as she gave her apartment address in Oak Park. In the sanctuary of her tiny one-bedroom apartment, Rebecca collapsed onto the floor, still in her wedding gown. The afternoon light faded into evening as she remained there, tears eventually giving way to a hollow numbness. At some point, she rose mechanically and opened the bathroom cabinet. Behind her spare toothbrush and aspirin bottle sat a small box she'd purchased 3 days ago, planning to share its contents after the wedding reception. The pregnancy test showed 2 clear pink lines. 3 weeks later, Rebecca sat stunned in a clinic examination room as the ultrasound technician pointed to the monitor. "Congratulations," the woman said cheerfully. "Twins!" Rebecca stared at the 2 distinct shapes on the screen, her hands cradling her still flat abdomen. "Twins," she repeated, the word both terrifying and wondrous. That same afternoon, she returned to find an eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 60 days to vacate due to unpaid rent. Rent Ethan had promised to help with while she saved for their honeymoon. Inside, she sank onto her second-hand couch, the ultrasound images clutched in her hand. "I'll be fine," she whispered to her unborn children. "We'll be fine." The next morning, she began packing her meager belongings into her old Honda Civic, the one possession of value she still owned. She arranged her clothes, books, and the few kitchen items worth keeping in neat piles in the trunk and back seat. The wedding dress she donated to a thrift store, unable to bear its presence a moment longer. For the next several weeks, Rebecca slept in her car, parking in different locations around the city to avoid attention. She rose at 5 each morning to use the bathroom at a gym where she'd secured a part-time position at the reception desk. By 7, she was serving coffee at the cafe, smiling through exhaustion as if her world hadn't collapsed. Evenings found her at a telemarketing center, making calls until midnight, her voice growing hoarser with each hour. The story of Montgomery's abandoned bride circulated quickly through Chicago's upper echelons. Customers at the cafe pointed and whispered when they recognized her serving tables with deepening shadows under her eyes. "I heard she tried to trap him with a pregnancy," commented an elderly woman wearing expensive jewelry, loud enough for Rebecca to hear as she served her tea. Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she set down the cup, but her face remained impassive. Let them talk. They knew nothing of the truth growing inside her. By her 4th month of pregnancy, working 3 jobs while homeless had taken its toll. During a double shift at the cafe, the room began to spin as Rebecca carried a tray of lattes. She heard gasps as the tray clattered to the floor, and then darkness claimed her. She awoke in a hospital bed, a kindly nurse adjusting her IV. "You're severely dehydrated and exhausted," the nurse explained, her eyes filled with concern. "You need to rest for your baby's sake." "I don't have a choice," Rebecca whispered, tears finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "I don't have family. I don't have anyone." That night, alone in the hospital room, Rebecca made the decision that would change everything. Opening her laptop, she researched scholarship programs for vulnerable pregnant women at the University of Illinois. Her incomplete computer science degree, abandoned to work full-time, could be her path forward. "I'd rather my children grow up without a father than have one who considers them insufficient," she promised herself, caressing her growing belly. "Someday, Ethan Montgomery will choke on his own words when he discovers what he lost, not for revenge, but because I'll become everything he said I could never be." 15 years later, when Ethan Montgomery would see Rebecca Collins take the stage as a billionaire CEO of the company outperforming his in the market, he would finally understand the true meaning of not being enough. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over Rebecca's pale face. The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily, tracking not just her heartbeat, but the two tiny lives growing inside her. She stared at the ceiling, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. 4 months pregnant, and her life had become unrecognizable from the one she'd planned. "Miss Collins?" A nurse with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair entered, carrying a clipboard. "Dr. Patel will be discharging you this afternoon, but she's very concerned about your condition." Rebecca nodded weakly. The diagnosis was straightforward enough: severe dehydration, exhaustion, and malnutrition. The unspoken diagnosis, homelessness and desperation, hung in the air between them. "I'll be more careful," Rebecca promised, already calculating how quickly she could return to her shifts at the cafe. The nurse, Martha according to her name tag, sat on the edge of the bed. "Honey, you collapsed while carrying a tray of coffee. If your manager hadn't caught you, you might have hit your head on the way down." She paused, her expression softening. "The doctor says you're working yourself to exhaustion. You can't keep going like this." "I don't have a choice," Rebecca whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sleeping in my car. I work 3 jobs. I don't have family. I don't have anyone." Martha's hand covered hers. "And the father?" The question sent a fresh wave of pain through Rebecca's chest. "He made it very clear I wasn't good enough for his world." She swallowed hard. "He doesn't know about the babies." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't push further. Instead, she handed Rebecca a pamphlet. "There's a women's shelter on Damen Avenue. They have programs specifically for pregnant women. It's not the Ritz, but it's better than a Honda Civic." Rebecca finished with a hollow laugh. After Martha left, Rebecca reached for her laptop, one of the few possessions she'd kept in her car for safekeeping. The battery was at 20%, enough to do some research. She opened a browser and typed, "Scholarships for Pregnant Women Chicago." Several clicks later, she found herself on the University of Illinois website, reading about a special grant program for vulnerable women seeking to complete interrupted degrees. The application deadline was in 3 days. Rebecca's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her community college transcript showed 2 years of computer science coursework with a 3.8 GPA before she dropped out to work full-time. Would it be enough? Could she possibly manage classes while pregnant, then with newborn twins? A soft flutter in her abdomen, the first definite movement she'd felt from the babies, seemed to answer her question. "Okay, little ones," she whispered. "We're doing this." 2 days later, Rebecca woke before dawn in her car, parked behind a 24-hour grocery store. The temperature had dropped overnight, and her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. She had slept in her coat and 2 sweaters, but the cold still penetrated to her bones. She started the engine briefly to warm up, mindful of her dwindling gas funds, then made her way to the gym where she worked mornings at the reception desk. The manager had given her a key, Never suspecting, she used it to shower and change clothes before her shift began. In the locker room mirror, Rebecca assessed her appearance critically. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her cheeks had hollowed from weight loss the pregnancy couldn't disguise. She pulled her hair into a neat ponytail and applied concealer, determined to maintain a professional appearance despite everything. At 5:30, she took her position behind the reception desk, greeting early morning fitness enthusiasts with a smile that never reached her eyes. At 8, she left for her shift at Millennium Park Cafe, the same establishment where she'd met Ethan nearly a year ago. The cafe had become a different place for her. Once it had been the setting of a fairy tale beginning. Now it was a stage for ongoing humiliation. Regular customers who had witnessed her rise as Ethan Montgomery's fiancée now watched her fall with barely concealed curiosity. "Your usual table, Mrs. Westfield?" Rebecca asked the silver-haired woman who entered precisely at 9:15 each morning. Mrs. Westfield, a fixture of Chicago's charity circuit and close friend of the Montgomery family, looked Rebecca up and down, her gaze lingering on the small baby bump beginning to show through her uniform. "I suppose that's his, then?" she asked, nodding toward Rebecca's abdomen. Rebecca's spine stiffened. "Your Earl Grey will be right out," she responded, walking away before her composure cracked. In the back room, she leaned against the wall, breathing deeply to control the nausea that was equal parts morning sickness and humiliation. A text message illuminated her phone screen, a reminder about her afternoon telemarketing shift. Her day continued in this fashion, serving coffee until 3, racing across town for her telemarketing job from 4 until midnight, then returning to her car to sleep for a few precious hours before starting again. The scholarship application, completed during her lunch break, had been submitted just before the deadline. 3 weeks into this punishing routine, Rebecca sat in her car eating a peanut butter sandwich while reviewing a pregnancy book borrowed from the public library. According to the chapter on twin development, her babies were now the size of avocados, with functioning ears that could hear her voice. "I promise you'll never feel unwanted," she told them, pressing her hand against her growing belly. "You'll never be told you're not enough." A sharp knock on her window startled her. A police officer stood outside, flashlight in hand. Rebecca rolled down the window, heart pounding. "License and registration, please," he said. "We've had reports of someone sleeping in a vehicle in this area." Rebecca's hands trembled as she handed over her documents. "I'm just taking a break before my next shift, officer." His flashlight scanned the interior, noting the neatly folded blanket in the passenger seat, the small toiletry bag, the duffel of clothes. "Ma'am, are you living in your car?" Pride warred with desperation in Rebecca's chest. Finally, she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The officer's expression softened. "You can't stay here. It's not safe, especially in your condition." He handed back her license. "There's a women's shelter 3 blocks east. Ask for Sister Margaret. Tell her Officer Reyes sent you." That night, Rebecca checked into the shelter Martha had mentioned weeks before. The room was small with 2 sets of bunk beds shared by 4 women, but it was warm and safe. For the first time in months, she slept on a real mattress, tears of relief dampening her pillow. The following week brought an unexpected email from the University of Illinois. She had been awarded the Women in Transition Scholarship, covering tuition and providing a small stipend for living expenses. The program included priority placement in university family housing once her babies arrived. When Rebecca shared the news with Sister Margaret, the nun embraced her. "God provides," she said simply. "I'm not sure I believe that anymore," Rebecca replied honestly. Sister Margaret's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Faith isn't about what we believe in good times. It's what carries us through the dark ones." With the scholarship secured, Rebecca reduced her work hours to 2 jobs instead of 3, focusing on her health for the baby's sake. She enrolled in spring semester classes, determined to complete her computer science degree despite the challenges ahead. On a cold February morning, she received another email that changed everything. The university had an immediate opening in their subsidized family housing for a pregnant student in urgent need. By the weekend, Rebecca moved into a small but clean one-bedroom apartment on campus, furnished with basic essentials donated by a local charity. Standing in the tiny living room, keys in hand, Rebecca felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. She walked to the window, watching students cross the snow-covered quad. Next fall, she would be among them, perhaps pushing a double stroller between classes. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time since Ethan's cruel rejection, it felt possible. That evening, Rebecca hung curtains in the nursery corner of her bedroom and assembled a second-hand crib donated by the shelter. As she worked, she spoke to her babies about algorithms and data structures, subjects from her first week back at school. "We're going to make it," she promised them. "And one day, I'll give you everything he said I couldn't provide." In the small mirror above her dresser, Rebecca caught her reflection, still tired, still bearing the marks of hardship, but standing straighter now, eyes focused on the future instead of the past. While she slept in the beige university apartment that night, Rebecca couldn't have imagined that one day she would own the entire glass and steel high-rise whose solitary light shone in the distance. The acceptance letter from the University of Illinois sat on Rebecca's makeshift desk, a folding table positioned perfectly to catch the morning light through her small apartment window. She traced her fingers over the embossed university logo, still hardly believing this new chapter was beginning. After weeks of sleeping in her car and struggling to maintain 3 jobs while pregnant, having a permanent address and academic purpose felt like stepping into someone else's life. Rebecca glanced around her subsidized campus apartment. The space was modest, one bedroom with a small living area and kitchenette, but compared to her Honda Civic, it felt palatial. The university housing department had provided basic furniture, a twin bed, a desk, a small dining table with 2 chairs, and a gently used couch. The walls were institutional beige, but Rebecca had already begun personalizing the space with second-hand finds. A colorful throw pillow, a small potted plant, and a calendar where she meticulously tracked her pregnancy milestones alongside assignment due dates. She rested her hand on her growing belly, now prominently visible at 5 months. "This is home now, little ones," she whispered. "Not what I planned, but it's ours." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rebecca opened it to find Judith, her neighbor from across the hall, another single mother in the university's family housing program. "Thought you might need this," Judith said, holding up a large cardboard box. "My Zach outgrew it, and with twins coming, you'll need all the help you can get." Inside the box was a portable crib, slightly worn but perfectly functional. "Judith, I can't." "Yes, you can," the older woman insisted. "That's how this place works. We help each other. Last semester, someone helped me with textbooks when I couldn't afford them." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she accepted the gift. These small kindnesses, from Judith, from Sister Margaret at the shelter, from the scholarship committee, were rebuilding her faith in humanity after Ethan's cruelty had shattered it. The following weeks settled into a routine. Rebecca attended morning classes, her growing belly attracting curious glances from younger students. She ignored them, focusing instead on reabsorbing the programming concepts she'd learned years earlier at community college. Afternoons were spent at her part-time job in the campus computer lab, where her supervisor had graciously arranged her hours around her class schedule. In late February, Rebecca sat in her obstetrician's waiting room, flipping through a dog-eared parenting magazine while waiting for her name to be called. A television mounted in the corner played a business news segment. Rebecca glanced up, then froze. Ethan's face filled the screen, his expression confident as he stood beside his father at the opening of a new Montgomery Investments office tower. "Montgomery father and son continue their financial dynasty expansion," the announcer intoned, with analysts predicting their new tech division will revolutionize financial security systems. Rebecca's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where one of the twins was kicking vigorously. The sight of Ethan, immaculately dressed, apparently unbothered by what he'd done, sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. She looked away, focusing on her tattered pregnancy book instead. "Rebecca Collins?" the nurse called. The doctor's appointment brought welcome news. Despite her difficult start, the twins were developing normally. "They're fighters," Dr. Chen said, smiling as she pointed to the ultrasound monitor, just like their mom. That night, Rebecca assembled the portable crib in the corner of her bedroom, transforming it into a makeshift nursery area. She'd found a second-hand rocking chair at a thrift store and positioned it near the window, creating a cozy spot for midnight feedings. As she worked, she kept her laptop open, coding a simple program while streaming a lecture she'd missed to attend her doctor's appointment. "This is called multitasking," she told her unborn sons. "You're going to see a lot of this." March arrived with midterm exams and increasing back pain as Rebecca's pregnancy progressed. She spent long hours in the library, catching up on the material she'd missed during her years away from school. Her programming professor, Dr. Kang, had taken notice of her dedication, offering additional guidance after class. "You have a natural talent for this," he told her one afternoon, reviewing her algorithm assignment. "Your approach is unconventional, but elegant." Rebecca smiled, treasuring the validation. "I've always seen patterns where others don't." "That's what makes a great programmer," he replied. "Keep this up, and you'll have companies competing for you at graduation." His words stayed with her, a small flame of hope amid the practical challenges of her daily life. That evening, as she stretched out on her small bed, laptop balanced on her knees while she completed an assignment, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine a future where she could provide for her sons through her own success. A future where Ethan's rejection became merely a painful chapter rather than the defining story of her life. April brought unseasonably warm weather and the unexpected arrival of the twins, 6 weeks earlier than her due date. Rebecca was in the campus computer lab when the first contraction hit, so sudden and intense that she gasped aloud, startling the students nearby. "I need to get to the hospital," she managed to say to her supervisor, who immediately called a taxi. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain, fear, and ultimately, wonder. Alone in the delivery room except for the medical team, Rebecca faced the most physically challenging experience of her life. When her strength faltered, she thought of all she'd endured since that day in Trinity Church, the humiliation, the homelessness, the hunger, and found reserves of determination she hadn't known existed. "Just one more push," the doctor encouraged as dawn broke over Chicago. At 6:17 on a Tuesday morning, Alexander James Collins entered the world, announcing his arrival with a surprisingly robust cry for a premature baby. 4 minutes later, his brother Andrew Thomas Collins followed, slightly smaller but equally vocal. When the nurse placed the swaddled infants in her arms, Rebecca stared in awe at their tiny faces, the delicate features, the wisps of dark hair, and most strikingly, the deep blue eyes that were unmistakably Ethan's. "They're perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A compassionate nurse named Marta stayed beyond her shift, helping Rebecca with the first feeding and showing her how to hold both babies at once. "No father in the picture?" she asked gently. Rebecca shook her head. "It's just us." Marta squeezed her shoulder. "You're stronger than you know." The days that followed tested that strength. The twins remained in the NICU for 2 weeks, their tiny bodies working to develop the lung capacity they would have gained in those final weeks in the womb. Rebecca divided her time between the hospital and hasty preparations at her apartment, deferring her final exams with understanding from her professors. When Alexander and Andrew were finally released, Rebecca brought them home to the carefully prepared corner of her bedroom. Reality hit hard that first night. 2 crying infants needing simultaneous feeding, changing and comforting, with only her exhausted body to provide it all. "We can do this," she repeated like a mantra, rocking one baby while using her foot to gently move the portable crib where the other lay fussing. Morning found her still awake, Alexander sleeping on her chest while Andrew finally dozed in the crib. Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca felt a fierce pride. They had survived their first night home, the first of many challenges they would face together. The weeks blurred into a routine of feeding, changing, brief sleep, and studying whenever possible. Rebecca arranged her summer courses online, working on assignments during rare quiet moments when both boys slept. She balanced her laptop on the arm of the rocking chair, typing with one hand while holding a baby with the other. By the time the twins were 3 months old, Rebecca had completed her summer coursework with surprising success, maintaining her scholarship with grades that impressed even Dr. Kang. The university's childcare center had 2 openings for the fall semester, allowing her to return to in-person classes while the boys received quality care. On a warm August evening, Rebecca sat on a blanket spread across the small patch of grass outside her apartment building. The twins lay beside her, 3-month-old eyes wide with fascination at the patterns of leaves shifting in the breeze. She held up her phone, capturing their matching expressions in a photograph. In that moment, looking at their perfect faces that carried echoes of the man who had deemed her unworthy, Rebecca felt something unexpected: gratitude. Had Ethan not abandoned her, she might never have discovered her own resilience, her capacity to rebuild from nothing, her ability to love so completely. "Your first lesson in life," she told her son softly, "is that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best things you'll ever know." As the twins' tiny fingers reached for hers, Rebecca didn't know that these same fingers would one day build algorithms that would transform the digital security landscape, algorithms that would ultimately eclipse those developed by the tech division Ethan Montgomery was currently establishing. The tiny fingers of the twins grasping Rebecca's hand contained a promise of future triumphs neither she nor they could yet imagine. As summer faded into fall, her world settled into a rhythm dictated by their needs and her unwavering determination to build something lasting from the ashes of her abandoned dreams. Rebecca's apartment, once sparse and institutional, gradually transformed with each passing month. By the time the twins reached their first birthday, she had adorned the walls with developmental charts and colorful alphabet prints. The living area now housed a playmat covered with educational toys acquired from thrift stores and campus parent exchanges. "Look at you two," Rebecca cooed one morning as she prepared for class, watching Alexander stack blocks while Andrew observed with quiet intensity. Even at 12 months, their distinct personalities emerged clearly. Alexander bold and experimental, Andrew thoughtful and methodical. The daycare center at the university had become their second home, staffed by early childhood education students who adored the twins and understood Rebecca's demanding schedule. She dropped them off at 7 each morning, rushing to her advanced programming class where she'd secured a front-row seat, determined to absorb every concept. "Ms. Collins, could you stay after class?" Professor Ramirez asked one Thursday afternoon. Rebecca nodded, quickly texting the daycare that she might be 5 minutes late. When the other students filed out, Ramirez handed her a flyer. "The computer science department is looking for lab assistants. 20 hours a week, flexible scheduling, and the pay is better than most campus jobs." Rebecca's heart raced. The position would allow her to eliminate her weekend waitressing job, the last vestige of her pre-college life, giving her precious additional hours with the twins. "I'd need to bring my sons occasionally during evening hours," she said cautiously. Ramirez smiled. "We're not monsters, Rebecca. Many of our graduate assistants have families. As long as the work gets done, we can accommodate." 2 weeks later, Rebecca settled into her new role. The computer lab became her sanctuary, a place where her skills were valued, where her mind could engage with complex problems while her boys napped in a playpen tucked discreetly in the corner of her small office. By the time Alexander and Andrew reached 18 months, their development fascinated even the child psychology professors who occasionally observed them during campus parenting group sessions. "Mama, code," Alexander announced one evening, pointing at her laptop screen with surprising precision. "That's right, sweetheart," Rebecca laughed, amazed at his vocabulary. "Mama's writing code." Andrew, not to be outdone, carefully brought her a book, placing it deliberately in her lap before climbing up beside her. At bedtime, instead of traditional lullabies, Rebecca often found herself explaining basic programming concepts, watching their attentive expressions with amusement. "Binary is like yes and no, on and off," she explained softly as they drifted towards sleep. "Everything in computers comes down to ones and zeros." The twins' second birthday arrived with a modest celebration in the small campus apartment. Rebecca had splurged on a proper cake and invited a few fellow student parents. As the toddlers awkwardly blew out candles with her help, she found herself thinking of how far they'd come. No longer the desperate pregnant woman sleeping in a car, Rebecca had completed 3 semesters with a perfect GPA. Her work in the computer lab had earned her recommendations from multiple professors, and her resume was slowly building with relevant experience. That evening, after tucking the twins into their toddler beds, a recent upgrade made possible by her improved finances, Rebecca scrolled through social media, something she rarely allowed herself time for. A headline from Chicago Business caught her attention. Montgomery Investments launches security division, Ethan Montgomery named director. The accompanying photo showed Ethan in an impeccable suit, cutting a ribbon at some corporate event. Beside him stood a willowy blonde woman, her hand possessively on his arm, an enormous diamond glinting on her finger. Rebecca closed the browser, her hand trembling slightly. She'd promised herself not to track his life, not to measure her worth against his achievements or happiness. Yet seeing him, successful, apparently engaged, utterly unaffected by the devastation he'd caused, reopened wounds she thought had scarred over. She glanced at her sleeping sons, their peaceful faces illuminated by the nightlight. Alexander had kicked off his blanket as usual. Andrew clutched his favorite stuffed robot. Both had Ethan's startling blue eyes and the beginning of his strong jawline, genetic echoes of the man who had no idea they existed. "We're better off without him," she whispered, adjusting Alexander's blanket. "All 3 of us." As the twins approached their 3rd birthday, their intellectual development began to outpace their peers dramatically. Rebecca noticed it first in their puzzle-solving abilities. What took other children their age several attempts, Alexander and Andrew accomplished almost immediately, their tiny hands working with surprising coordination. "Ms. Collins, could we speak about the boys?" Ms. Patel, the daycare director, asked one afternoon when Rebecca arrived for pickup. Rebecca's heart sank, conditioned to expect problems. "Is everything all right?" "More than all right," Ms. Patel smiled. "They're exceptional. Today, Andrew completed a puzzle designed for 5-year-olds, and Alexander has been helping other children with tasks they find difficult. Have you considered having them assessed for giftedness?" Pride swelled in Rebecca's chest, temporarily displacing the constant worry and exhaustion. "They're just curious," she demurred, though privately she'd noticed their accelerated development. That night, instead of reviewing her own coursework, Rebecca researched childhood development and educational options for gifted children. The cost of specialized programs was daunting, but she filed the information away, determined that her sons would have every opportunity she could possibly provide. The following semester brought Rebecca's final project presentation, the culmination of her undergraduate degree. She'd developed a security protocol that addressed vulnerabilities in common banking systems, incorporating innovations that had impressed even Professor Ramirez. "The committee will be expecting you at 2 o'clock, he reminded her that morning. "Are you ready?" Rebecca nodded confidently, though inside her stomach churned with nerves. This presentation could determine whether she graduated with the special honors that would open doors to the best employment opportunities. "Childcare fell through," she admitted. "The twins will have to come with me." Ramirez looked concerned. "The committee is rather traditional. 3-year-olds might be distracting." "They'll be perfect," Rebecca promised, though her confidence wavered. At the presentation, Rebecca arrived early, setting up her laptop while the twins sat on a blanket in the corner, solemnly coloring in the computer science coloring book she'd created specifically to keep them occupied. When the committee members entered, 5 professors in formal attire, their eyes immediately went to the children. "My apologies," Rebecca began. "My childcare arrangements." "Are those binary code coloring pages?" interrupted Dr. Whitmore, the department chair, peering at Alexander's sheet with interest. Rebecca nodded. "They enjoy patterns." "Fascinating," he murmured before returning to his seat. "Please proceed, Ms. Collins." The presentation flowed smoothly, Rebecca's confidence building with each slide. When she demonstrated her security protocol's effectiveness against common attacks, the committee leaned forward with obvious interest. As she concluded, an unexpected voice piped up from the corner. "Mama, bug in line 14, Alexander announced clearly, pointing to her code projection. The room fell silent. Rebecca scanned the code displayed on screen, then gasped softly. He was right. There was indeed a minor error in the 14th line that hadn't affected her demonstration but could cause problems in implementation. "He's correct," she acknowledged, quickly making the correction. "My son has been watching me code since infancy." When the committee awarded her not only honors but a special commendation for innovation, Rebecca knew her path forward had irrevocably changed. As she accepted their congratulations, the twins' hands firmly in hers, she felt a certainty that had eluded her since Ethan's betrayal. They would not merely survive, they would thrive. The graduation ceremony 3 weeks later found Rebecca in the audience rather than on stage. She'd chosen to skip the formal proceedings, instead celebrating quietly with the boys at a local pizza restaurant, explaining that Mama had finished an important task and would soon start a new job. While she ate ice cream with her sons that evening, reading the offer letter from a mid-sized security firm that had recruited her directly from the university program, Rebecca didn't know that in just 3 years, she would be the one doing the hiring and promoting, building her own company from scratch. While celebrating her graduation with pizza and ice cream, Rebecca couldn't have imagined the frustrations that awaited her in the corporate world. 3 years later, at 31, she sat in a glass-walled conference room at SecureTech Solutions, watching her male colleagues nod appreciatively as Vice President Richard Denton presented an access authentication protocol virtually identical to the one she had proposed 3 weeks earlier. "Brilliant approach, Rich," CEO Marcus Whitman enthused, slapping Denton on the shoulder. "This could revolutionize how our banking clients handle multi-factor authentication." Rebecca cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, but this is essentially the same proposal I presented last month. I have the documentation dated and—" "Rebecca," Whitman interrupted with a patronizing smile. "Richard's implementation includes hardware integration that makes your concept actually workable in real-world applications." "Those were my specifications as well," she insisted, sliding her tablet across the table. Page 4, third paragraph. The room fell uncomfortably silent as Whitman glanced at the screen, then passed it back without reading. "Let's not get caught up in who thought of what first. We're a team here." Team. The word echoed hollowly as Rebecca gathered her materials after the meeting. 3 years at SecureTech had taught her that team meant men received credit while women did the work. Despite her exceptional credentials and consistent innovations, she remained in a mid-level position while less qualified male colleagues advanced around her. That evening, Rebecca unlocked the door to her modest 2-bedroom apartment, immediately greeted by the sound of animated voices from the living room. "Mom's home!" Alexander announced, jumping up from the floor where he and Andrew had spread out components of what appeared to be a disassembled tablet. "We're rebuilding it with more RAM," Andrew explained quietly, his blue eyes serious behind slim glasses, eyes so like his father's that sometimes it caught Rebecca off guard. At 8 years old, the twins were already skipping grades, currently placed with 11-year-olds yet still outperforming them academically. Alexander, sociable and charismatic, helped his more reserved brother navigate social situations, while Andrew's analytical mind often solved problems that stumped children twice his age. Rebecca kissed their foreheads, then noticed the school forms on the counter. "What are these?" "Principal Mackenzie wants to advance us again," Alexander said, handing her a permission slip, "to 7th grade. Rebecca scanned the document, pride mingling with concern. Another advancement would place her 8-year-olds with 13-year-olds. The academic challenge would be appropriate, but the social implications worried her. "We can handle it, Mom," Andrew said, reading her expression with his usual perception. "The current material is too repetitive." Later that night, after tucking the boys into bed, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open to the project she'd been developing after hours for months. On screen, lines of elegant code formed a security system more sophisticated than anything SecureTech was currently producing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, her oldest friend and the only one who had stood by her after the wedding disaster. "Saw this and thought of you," Lisa wrote, attaching a business news article. The headline made Rebecca's stomach clench. "Montgomery Tech secures $50 contract with Federal Reserve." Below it, Ethan's face, older now, with distinguished touches of gray at his temples, smiled confidently beside his father. The Montgomery Investments Technology Division had apparently become a separate entity under Ethan's direct control. Rebecca closed the article without reading further. She refused to measure her life against his success or let his achievements diminish her own hard-won progress. Instead, she returned to her code, working until midnight refining the encryption protocol she believed could transform financial security. The following morning, she made one final attempt to get her ideas recognized. "I've developed a comprehensive security framework that addresses the vulnerabilities we identified in the Henderson Bank system," she explained to Whitman, presenting a folder of carefully prepared documentation. He barely glanced at it. "We've already assigned the Henderson project to Denton's team, but I'll pass this along if they need additional input." The dismissal was the final straw. That evening, as she helped the twins with their advanced mathematics homework, Rebecca made her decision. "Boys, what would you think if I started my own company?" Alexander looked up immediately, eyes bright with interest. "You mean like those startup people on TV?" "Something like that," she smiled. "Using the security protocol I've been developing." Andrew, always more cautious, considered the question carefully. "Would it be risky? We're okay now, right? We have this apartment and food and everything." Rebecca's heart squeezed at his concern. At 8 years old, he still carried the invisible weight of their early struggles. "We're okay," she assured him. "And yes, it would be a risk. But sometimes the biggest rewards come from the biggest risks." That weekend, the kitchen table transformed into Command Central. Rebecca drafted a business plan while the twins, surprisingly engaged, suggested names for the company. "Collins Digital Security," Alexander proposed. "Collins Digital Solutions sounds more comprehensive," Andrew countered. "Security is just one part of what your system does." Rebecca looked up from her laptop, startled by his insight. "That's actually perfect, Andrew. Collins Digital Solutions it is." 2 weeks later, she submitted her resignation to a stunned Whitman, who suddenly offered the promotion she'd deserved for years. "Too late," she said simply, gathering her few personal items from her desk. The next months tested every ounce of Rebecca's resolve. Their apartment's dining table became an improvised office covered with papers and laptops. She drained most of her modest savings to register the company and develop a professional website, working through the night after the twins were asleep. During the day, she networked relentlessly, reaching out to contacts from her university and SecureTech days, arranging meetings with potential investors who might see value in her innovative approach to digital security. The rejections came steadily. Most investors, predominantly men in their 50s and 60s, couldn't see past her gender and single motherhood to recognize the brilliance of her system. "Fascinating concept," one venture capitalist told her after a particularly grueling presentation, "but your family situation concerns me. A startup requires total commitment, often 60 to 80 hours weekly. As a single mother with young children, Can you realistically provide that level of dedication? Rebecca had maintained her composure, though internally she'd wanted to scream about the 80-hour weeks she'd already been working for 8 years while raising mathematical prodigies. After 6 months of closed doors, with her savings dwindling dangerously, Rebecca received an unexpected email from Sarah Chen, a partner at Aurora Ventures, a firm known for backing women-led startups. "Your security protocol caught my attention," Chen wrote. "I'd like to discuss potential investment opportunities. Are you available this Thursday?" Rebecca read the message 3 times, hardly daring to hope. That night, she rehearsed her presentation repeatedly, the twins offering surprisingly insightful feedback on technical points. "If the demo fails at any point, just explain the architecture clearly," Alexander advised. "The concept is strong enough to stand without perfect execution." Andrew, meanwhile, meticulously tested the prototype for bugs, his young fingers flying across the keyboard with astonishing competence. On Thursday, Rebecca arrived at Aurora Ventures' sleek downtown office with the twins in tow. An unexpected school closure had eliminated her childcare options. "I apologize for bringing my sons," she told Sarah Chen immediately. "Their school—" "No apologies necessary," Chen interrupted, smiling at the boys. "I'm interested in the whole package, and that includes understanding how you balance innovation with family responsibilities." The presentation proceeded flawlessly until the demonstration of the real-time threat detection feature, when the system unexpectedly froze. Rebecca felt a moment of panic before Alexander stepped forward confidently. "This is actually a perfect demonstration of the system's fail-safe protocols," he explained, addressing Chen directly while Andrew quietly fixed the code in the background. "Rather than proceeding with compromised data, it secures all access points while diagnostics run." Chen's eyebrows rose, clearly impressed by the child's poise and understanding. When Andrew discreetly signaled completion of the fix, Alexander continued seamlessly, "And now the system will automatically recover and resume normal operations, maintaining data integrity throughout." As predicted, the screen refreshed, the demonstration continuing as if nothing had happened. After the presentation concluded, Chen leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. "I've never seen a family team quite like yours. The 3 of you together are something exceptional. Tell me, Ms. Collins, what's your vision for this company 5 years from now?" Rebecca answered with the confidence of someone who had already overcome impossible odds. "In 5 years, Collins Digital Solutions will be the industry standard for financial security systems, protecting not just banks, but their customers' fundamental right to digital privacy." 3 days later, Chen's offer arrived: $1.5 million in seed funding for Collins Digital Solutions, with terms significantly more favorable than Rebecca had dared hope for. As she signed the incorporation papers, the twins standing proudly at her side, Rebecca felt the weight of the past lifting. The desperate woman who had once slept in her car while pregnant seemed like someone from another lifetime, connected yet distant, a chrysalis from which her current self had emerged. While she framed the first investment check, Rebecca couldn't predict that in just 7 years she would be directly competing with Montgomery Investments, shaking the empire that Ethan had inherited. The framed investment check hanging on the wall of Collins Digital Solutions' first real office space caught the morning sunlight, casting a golden glow across the otherwise sparse room. Rebecca stood in the doorway, cardboard box of supplies in her arms, taking in the modest but significant milestone. 1 floor of a mid-rise commercial building in Chicago's up-and-coming tech corridor, not exactly Silicon Valley glamour, but worlds away from her kitchen table operations. "Mom, where should we set up the server rack?" Alexander called from behind her, struggling alongside Andrew to maneuver a dolly loaded with equipment. "Against the back wall," Rebecca directed, setting down her box. "Remember what we discussed about proper ventilation?" The twins, now 9 years old, nodded with the seriousness of seasoned IT professionals. Despite their youth, they understood the magnitude of this moment, the physical manifestation of their mother's vision taking shape around them. Sarah Chen's investment had transformed possibilities into realities with breathtaking speed. Within weeks, Rebecca had secured this space, ordered essential equipment, and begun the process of building her team. Today marked the official move-in, with interviews for her first developers scheduled for the afternoon. As she unpacked monitors and arranged her new desk, Rebecca felt a flutter of anxiety. Leading from the front had never been her challenge. She'd been doing that since the moment she discovered her pregnancy. But delegation, trusting others with her creation, would require a different kind of courage. By noon, the main area was arranged into a functional workspace. Alexander and Andrew had configured the primary development machines with impressive efficiency, working in tandem with barely a word exchanged between them, their connection allowing for an almost telepathic coordination. At precisely 1 o'clock, the first candidate arrived. Rebecca recognized the hesitation in his expression when he realized the company's founder and CEO was a woman. By the third interview, she'd grown accustomed to the subtle shift in demeanor, the slight recalibration of expectations, the carefully neutral expressions replacing initial skepticism. "Your security protocol is theoretically sound," remarked the fifth candidate, a bearded programmer with an MIT degree and thinly veiled condescension, "but implementing it across legacy banking systems would require practical experience that I've identified the integration pathways for the 17 most common banking infrastructures," Rebecca interrupted calmly, sliding a document across the table, "including compatibility protocols for systems dating back to 1993. The man scanned the technical specifications, his expression shifting from dismissal to surprise and finally to respect. By the end of the day, Rebecca had assembled a core team of 4 developers who valued innovation over hierarchy. 6 months into operations, Collins Digital Solutions secured its first major contract, providing security infrastructure for Heartland Regional Bank's digital banking platform. The day Rebecca signed the agreement, she brought cupcakes to the office, now bustling with 12 employees. The twins, who spent afternoons there after school, solemnly explained to the staff how the frosting-to-cake ratio represented optimal resource allocation. "Did you teach them corporate finance too?" joked Martinez, her lead developer. Rebecca smiled. "They teach themselves most things. I just try to keep up." The Heartland implementation proved transformative. When the bank's security withstood a sophisticated attack that compromised 2 larger competitors, industry attention turned to Collins Digital Solutions. Within weeks, Rebecca's phone rang constantly with inquiries from financial institutions seeking similar protection. The twins' presence in the office became something of a legend among clients. During a critical meeting with executives from a conservative Midwestern bank, Alexander and Andrew wandered in after school, quietly taking seats in the corner with their advanced calculus homework. "As I was saying, our multi-layered authentication process prevents—" Rebecca continued her presentation until noticing the bank president's distracted glance toward the boys. "My apologies," she said. "My sons sometimes join me after school." "That's college-level mathematics," the man observed, squinting at Andrew's notebook. "Yes, sir," Andrew replied quietly. "I'm working on a proof related to prime number factorization that might have applications for your encryption needs." The executives exchanged glances. By meeting's end, they'd not only signed the contract but requested that the young consultants be included in implementation discussions. As the company grew, so did their living situation. 14 months after founding CDS, Rebecca signed the lease on a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in a desirable neighborhood with excellent schools. The day they moved in, the twins explored every inch of their new home with wonder. "We each get our own room?" Alexander asked, standing in the doorway of a bedroom nearly twice the size of the one they'd shared previously. "You do," Rebecca confirmed, "though something tells me you'll still end up working together most of the time." That night, after the twins had finally fallen asleep in their new rooms, Rebecca stood at the living room window, gazing at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a business news alert mentioning Montgomery Investments' latest acquisition. She hesitated, then opened it. The article detailed Ethan Montgomery's expansion of the technology division, absorbing a smaller security firm. His quote about strategic consolidation in the cybersecurity space was accompanied by a photo of him at some charity gala, his arm around a stunning brunette, different from the blonde in previous photos. Society pages identified her as his new fiancée, Catherine Westmore, from a prominent Boston family. Rebecca closed the article, refusing to give him space in her mind. Her own achievements, built from nothing without family connections or inherited wealth, meant far more than his predictable advancement within the company his grandfather had founded. By the 2-year mark, Collins Digital Solutions had expanded to 30 employees and a full floor of office space. Rebecca's innovative security framework had become the talk of the financial technology sector, with implementation in 8 regional banks and discussions underway with 2 national institutions. The growing pains were real. Nights stretched long as Rebecca balanced management responsibilities with hands-on development and motherhood. After particularly grueling days, she would return home well past the twins' bedtime, leaving notes with math jokes or coding challenges for them to find at breakfast. On Alexander and Andrew's 11th birthday, she took a rare full day off. The celebration was modest by the standards of their increasingly affluent peers, a science museum visit followed by dinner at their favorite restaurant, but the boys deemed it perfect. "Mom," Andrew said thoughtfully over dessert, "Jason from school says his dad's company might be acquired by Montgomery Tech. Isn't that the name on those articles you sometimes read?" Rebecca nearly choked on her water. "Why do you ask?" "The name sounded familiar." Alexander shrugged. "We saw it on your tablet once." Rebecca considered how much to share. The twins had asked about their father occasionally over the years, accepting her simplified explanation that he hadn't been ready for family responsibility. As they grew older and more perceptive, she knew more detailed questions would come. "Montgomery Tech is run by someone I knew a long time ago," she said carefully. "We have some history, but it's not important now." The boys exchanged one of their communicative glances but didn't press further. 3 years after its founding, Collins Digital Solutions reached a watershed moment. Their proprietary security system had protected First Midwest Bank from a sophisticated attack that successfully breached 2 competitors using Montgomery Tech's security platform. The industry fallout was immediate, with Montgomery scrambling to patch vulnerabilities while Collins's reputation soared. On the morning the news broke, Rebecca arrived at their now expansive offices to find her team gathered around a monitor displaying financial news coverage. "Collins Digital Solutions' innovative approach has revolutionized banking security," announced the CNBC commentator. "This relatively new player has outperformed established giants, raising serious questions about traditional security paradigms." A photo of Rebecca appeared on screen, a professional headshot from a recent technology conference where she'd been a featured speaker. The image dissolved to one of Ethan Montgomery looking uncharacteristically defensive at a press conference addressing the security breach. Rebecca felt no triumph in his public discomfort, only validation of her vision and approach. She redirected her team's attention to their upcoming projects, focusing on progress rather than competition. That evening, she received an unexpected call from a major venture capital firm offering significant investment to accelerate CDS's growth. The valuation, nearly $500 million, momentarily took her breath away. As the Collins Digital Solutions prepared to launch on the stock market, no one could have predicted that the next major social event in Boston would place Rebecca face-to-face with the man who had abandoned her, in a confrontation that would shake Silicon Valley to its foundations. The valuation of nearly $500 million marked a turning point for Collins Digital Solutions. 5 years later, as Rebecca stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office overlooking Chicago's skyline, that number had multiplied tenfold. The CNN business segment playing on the large wall screen behind her told the story in bold graphics and admiring commentary. "Rebecca Collins, the woman who revolutionized digital security," announced the polished anchor. With a market valuation now exceeding $4.8 billion and more than 2,300 employees across 3 continents, Collins Digital Solutions has become the principal competitor to Montgomery Tech in the corporate cybersecurity sector. Rebecca turned from the window, watching the footage of herself walking through the impressive headquarters of CDS with confident strides, explaining complex security concepts in accessible terms. The tailored Armani suit she wore in the interview had replaced the discount store clothes of her struggling days, but the determined gleam in her eyes remained unchanged. "What many find most remarkable about Collins' rise," continued the reporter, "is that she built her empire while raising twin sons as a single mother." The segment cut to a recent technology conference where Alexander and Andrew, now 14, had presented their groundbreaking algorithm to a room full of industry veterans. Despite their youth, the boys commanded the stage with natural authority, fielding complex questions with eloquence that belied their age. Rebecca smiled, pressing the remote to turn off the television as her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The car is ready to take you home, Ms. Collins," and Alexander called. He and Andrew finished the algorithm for the MIT presentation. "Thank you, Diane," Rebecca replied, gathering her designer briefcase. The drive to her Gold Coast penthouse took precisely 23 minutes in evening traffic. As the elevator ascended to the 38th floor, Rebecca mentally reviewed the schedule for their upcoming Boston trip. The partnership with the Rockwell Foundation represented everything she valued, creating educational opportunities for disadvantaged young women in technology. The elevator doors opened directly into her spacious foyer, where Alexander waited impatiently, his slim fingers adjusting his glasses in the gesture so reminiscent of his thoughtful nature. "Mom, you have to see what we did with the quantum encryption module," he said without preamble. "Andrew thinks we solved the lattice problem that was creating vulnerabilities." Rebecca smiled, setting down her briefcase. "Let me change first. Where is your brother?" "Kitchen. He's stress-eating carrots because Professor Kaminsky is reviewing our paper tonight." Rebecca found Andrew precisely as described, methodically crunching baby carrots while staring at his laptop screen. His blue eyes, so startlingly like Ethan's, flicked up briefly in acknowledgement before returning to the complex equations displayed. "The professor said we can publish as co-authors in the Journal of Computational Science if he approves the final draft," Andrew said, his quiet voice belying the significance of the achievement. Few doctoral candidates, let alone 14-year-olds, received such recognition. "I'm incredibly proud of you both," Rebecca said, taking a carrot from his plate. "But remember, we're going to Boston primarily to finalize the partnership with the Rockwell Foundation for scholarships in technology. The benefit dinner is just a formality." The twins nodded simultaneously, a habit they'd never outgrown. Their synchronicity extended beyond physical movements to intellectual pursuits, each complementing the other's approach to problem-solving. Alexander brought creative leaps of intuition. Andrew contributed methodical precision. "We've packed our presentation materials," Alexander said. "And those suits you had tailored last month." Rebecca nodded approvingly. Years of careful mentoring and privileged education, provided entirely through her own efforts, had shaped 2 exceptional young men. They would begin their early admission studies at Harvard next fall, having completed high school coursework years ahead of schedule. Later that evening, after reviewing their impressive algorithm modifications, Rebecca sat at her desk organizing documents for the Boston trip. The Rockwell Foundation partnership would provide full scholarships to 50 young women from disadvantaged backgrounds annually, the kind of opportunity that had changed her own life when she needed it most. A notification appeared on her tablet, the quarterly market report showing Collins Digital Solutions outperforming projections again. A smaller headline caught her eye. "Montgomery Tech loses key government contract amid security concerns." Rebecca closed the notification without reading further. She had long ago stopped measuring her success against Ethan's failures, finding greater satisfaction in her own accomplishments than in his setbacks. Still, she couldn't deny the symmetry of their trajectories. hers ascending as his company struggled to maintain relevance in the rapidly evolving security landscape. 3 days later, the Collins family arrived at Boston's Logan Airport via private jet. The twins immediately buried themselves in their laptops, making final adjustments to their presentation while Rebecca reviewed partnership documents with her legal team via video conference. "The St. Regis has confirmed your penthouse suite, Ms. Collins." Her assistant's voice came through the car's speaker system as they drove into the city. "The Foundation representatives will meet you tomorrow at 9. Tonight's schedule is clear for your preparation." The luxury hotel welcomed them with deferential efficiency. As the bellhop arranged their luggage in the opulent suite, Rebecca caught herself remembering a time when she couldn't afford a motel room, when her car had been her only shelter. The contrast between that desperate young woman and the powerful CEO she had become sometimes felt surreal. The following morning brought successful meetings with the Rockwell Foundation, culminating in the signing of the scholarship program agreement. Rebecca's donation of $5 million had been matched by the foundation, creating an endowment that would support young women in technology for decades to come. "This partnership embodies everything Collins Digital stands for," Rebecca told the foundation director as cameras flashed. "Technology should be accessible to brilliant minds regardless of their background or circumstances." As they returned to the hotel to prepare for the evening's benefit dinner, Alexander and Andrew engaged in quiet conversation about quantum computing advances they'd read about on the flight. Rebecca watched them with profound affection, marveling at the extraordinary young men they had become. "Remember," she said as they entered the elevator, "many of these people at tonight's event will be potential investors or partners. First impressions matter." "We know, Mom," Alexander replied with good-natured patience. "We've been doing these events since we were 10. "And we've reviewed the guest list," Andrew added. 78% are executives from technology or financial sectors, 12% are foundation representatives, and 10% are political figures. In her suite, Rebecca prepared methodically for the evening. Her stylist had sent a midnight blue Valentino gown that complemented her figure perfectly, along with sapphire jewelry that highlighted her eyes. As she applied her makeup with practiced precision, she reflected on how far she had come from the girl who once couldn't afford basic cosmetics. At precisely 7:30, Rebecca emerged to find the twins waiting in the sitting room, impeccable in their custom suits. Despite their youth, they carried themselves with the confidence of young men accustomed to moving in adult professional circles. "You both look very handsome," she said, adjusting Andrew's slightly crooked tie with maternal precision. In the lobby, they were immediately recognized by the foundation director, who approached with warm enthusiasm. "Ms. Collins, what a pleasure to see you again," she exclaimed. "Your donation of $5 million for the Diversity and Technology program is truly revolutionary." Rebecca smiled graciously. "These young men deserve much of the credit. They've been advocating for more inclusive representation in STEM fields since they were 12. As they approached the grand ballroom entrance, Rebecca paused to give her sons a final reminder. "You may be the youngest people here, but you've earned your place through merit. Never forget that." What Rebecca couldn't know as they crossed that threshold was that destiny had orchestrated an extraordinary coincidence. The event coordinator had invited all major CEOs from the technology sector, including Ethan Montgomery, now president of Montgomery Tech following his father's retirement. While adjusting Andrew's tie at the entrance to the grand ballroom, Rebecca had no idea that by walking through those doors, the past she had left behind was about to violently collide with her triumphant present. The St. Regis ballroom gleamed like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers cascading from coffered ceilings, casting prismatic light across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Extravagant flower arrangements, orchids, roses, and lilies in sculptural formations adorned tables draped in cream silk. The air carried notes of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and the particular confidence that comes with extreme privilege. Rebecca entered with practiced poise, the midnight blue Valentino flowing around her like liquid night. The twins flanked her, their posture impeccable, expressions composed despite being the youngest attendees by several years. She felt a flutter of maternal pride watching them, Alexander's easy charm already drawing smiles from a group of tech executives, Andrew's quiet intelligence evident in his thoughtful observation of the room's dynamics. "Ms. Collins!" A silver-haired woman in Chanel approached, diamond earrings catching the light. "I'm Eliza Thornton, Rockwell Foundation board member. Your contribution to our diversity initiative has created quite the buzz." Rebecca smiled warmly. "The Foundation's work aligns perfectly with our company values. My sons and I believe technology should be accessible to brilliant minds regardless of background." As Eliza introduced them to other Foundation members, Rebecca navigated the social choreography with effortless grace, a skill hard-won through years of executive functions. The frightened, humiliated woman who had once served coffee to these same elites had transformed completely, her presence now commanding respect rather than pity or dismissal. Across the ballroom, surrounded by investment bankers in identical bespoke suits, Ethan Montgomery held court. At 47, time had been kind to him. His dark hair now distinguished with silver at the temples, his jawline still sharp, his posture radiating the easy confidence of generational wealth. He gestured with a crystal tumbler of single malt as he described Montgomery Tech's latest acquisition to an attentive audience. The security infrastructure was solid, but their client integration protocols needed... He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze drawn across the room as if by magnetic force. The crystal tumbler slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that momentarily silenced nearby conversations. Rebecca turned toward the sound, instinct making her scan for the source of disruption. Her eyes found Ethan's across the crowded room, and 15 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. The world around them continued. Waiters rushed to clean up the broken glass, conversations resumed, music played, but between them stretched a moment of suspended animation. Ethan's face drained of color, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief to something like fear. "Mom, that man over there just dropped his drink," Andrew observed, his analytical mind always noting anomalies. "Is he all right? He looks like he's seen a ghost." Rebecca composed herself with remarkable speed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "It happens at these events. Let's go speak with Mrs. Vanderbilt. She mentioned wanting to meet you both." She guided the twins toward the opposite side of the room, her mind racing. Of course Ethan would be here. How had she not anticipated this possibility? Boston was his territory now. Montgomery Tech had relocated its headquarters here 3 years ago. "Rebecca?" The voice behind her, that voice, sent a shiver down her spine. 15 years had deepened it slightly, but the cadence remained etched in her memory. She turned slowly, her face a masterpiece of composed indifference. "Ethan," she acknowledged with a polite nod. What a surprise. His eyes moved frantically between her face and the young men beside her, struggling to process what he was seeing. Rebecca watched the realization dawn in his expression as he took in Alexander's confident stance, Andrew's thoughtful gaze, and in both, the unmistakable blue eyes identical to his own, the distinctive Montgomery jawline that had graced company annual reports for 3 generations. "These are..." He couldn't finish the sentence, shock constricting his throat. "Alexander and Andrew Collins," Rebecca completed with practiced ease. "My sons. Boys, this is Ethan Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Tech." The twins extended their hands with the polished manners she had carefully cultivated in them, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake occurring before them. "Pleased to meet you, sir," Alexander said with his characteristic directness. Andrew, ever observant, tilted his head slightly. "Your company developed that authentication system we found vulnerabilities in last month, correct? We sent a detailed report to your security team." Ethan's shock deepened visibly. "You're the Collins prodigies?" he stammered. "My entire security division has been talking about you for weeks." Rebecca maintained her composed expression. though satisfaction bloomed quietly within her. The hackers, who had exposed critical flaws in Montgomery Tech's flagship security product, saving the company millions in potential data breach liabilities, were his own sons. The boys have a particular talent for identifying weaknesses in security protocols, she said smoothly, something I've encouraged since they were quite young. Ethan stared at the twins with undisguised wonder. How old are you? 14, they answered simultaneously. 14, he repeated, the word barely audible. A statuesque woman in a crimson gown appeared at Ethan's side, possessively taking his arm. Her expertly contoured face tightened with displeasure at finding him engaged in conversation without her. Darling, we should really greet the Astors before dinner, she prompted, her voice honeyed but insistent. Her gaze flicked dismissively over Rebecca before registering the twins with slight confusion. Catherine, give me a moment, Ethan replied, his voice strained. Recognition flickered in Rebecca's mind. Catherine Westmore, now apparently Catherine Montgomery, the Boston banking heiress whose engagement to Ethan had been announced in financial papers 2 years ago. Ms. Collins? A coordinator in a headset approached urgently. We're ready for you. It's almost time for your speech about the partnership. Rebecca nodded graciously. Of course, if you'll excuse us, she said to Ethan and Catherine, guiding the twins away with gentle pressure on their shoulders. Who was that man, Mom? Alexander asked as they walked toward the stage. He looked at us very strangely. An old acquaintance, Rebecca replied evenly. Focus on the presentation now. On the raised platform, under professional lighting that highlighted her elegant features, Rebecca addressed the assembled elite with eloquence and authority. She spoke of innovation, inclusion, and the future of digital security, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. From her vantage point, she could see Ethan still standing where they'd left him, watching her with an expression of stunned recognition, not just of her physical presence, but of the power she now wielded in the very circles that had once excluded her. And now, announced the Master of Ceremonies as Rebecca concluded to appreciative applause, to present the next segment of our benefit program, please welcome Mr. Ethan Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Tech. Rebecca descended the steps as Ethan approached, their paths crossing momentarily in the transition. She paused, close enough that only he could hear her whispered words. 15 years, Ethan, and I still have the power to make you drop your expensive glasses. Color flooded his face as he continued to the microphone. Rebecca rejoined her sons at their table, her posture relaxed but alert, like a chess master watching an opponent realize they've been quietly outmaneuvered. At the podium, Ethan stared at his prepared remarks, his hands visibly trembling. The teleprompter scrolled with corporate platitudes about innovation and partnership, but after stumbling through the first paragraph, he stopped abruptly. Forgive me, he said, his gaze finding Rebecca in the audience. Today I've faced a personal revelation that changes everything. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Catherine, his fiancée, frowned from her seat at the head table. 15 years ago, I made the greatest mistake of my life, Ethan continued, abandoning the teleprompter script entirely. I rejected someone extraordinary for superficial prejudiced reasons. Rebecca maintained her impassive expression while the twins exchanged confused glances beside her. Rebecca Collins wasn't just the woman I abandoned at the altar, Ethan confessed, prompting audible gasps of shock from the audience. She was the woman pregnant with my children, children I never knew existed, children who have grown into exceptional young men without any contribution from me. The room exploded in scandalized whispers. Catherine rose abruptly from her seat, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. With deliberate, dramatic flair, she removed her enormous engagement ring and dropped it into a champagne glass before storming from the ballroom. While reporters watched with rapt attention at the society scandal unfolding before them, Rebecca remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Inside, a complex storm of emotions, vindication, Residual pain, protective fury for her sons, competed for dominance. As the assembled elite of Boston witnessed the public unraveling of Ethan Montgomery, Rebecca felt no triumph, only the quiet certainty that justice sometimes arrived on its own schedule, delivered by the simple truth rather than by human design. Chaos engulfed the elegant ballroom as Ethan's public confession echoed through the stunned silence that followed. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness like lightning in a gathering storm, capturing the moment for tomorrow's headlines. Catherine's dramatic exit, diamond ring abandoned in champagne, created a wake of whispers that rippled across the assembled elite. Staff members rushed frantically between tables, attempting to restore order while public relations specialists huddled in corners, phones pressed to ears, damage control already in motion. Rebecca remained seated, her posture perfect, face an unreadable mask of composure. Beneath the table, her knuckles whitened slightly as she gripped her clutch, the only external sign of the emotional maelstrom within. Alexander and Andrew exchanged glances, their identical blue eyes reflecting confusion and dawning comprehension. "Mom?" Andrew's quiet voice carried a question weighted with 14 years of unspoken history. His analytical mind was already connecting pieces, reconstructing a narrative from fragments suddenly revealed. "Is he—" "Yes," Rebecca answered simply, her voice steady despite the tremor threatening to surface. "We'll discuss this privately, not here." Alexander straightened his shoulders, instinctively protective. That's why he stared at us like that. Across the room, Ethan stumbled from the podium, ignoring the event coordinator's desperate attempts to salvage the program. He moved directly toward their table with unsteady steps, his face ashen, eyes never leaving the twins. Several photographers tracked his movement, sensing the unfolding drama. "Rebecca, boys, I need to speak with you," he pleaded, voice raw with emotion. "Please." The foundation director approached swiftly, professional smile strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a brief intermission before continuing with our program. Please enjoy the refreshments." Rebecca rose with deliberate grace, gathering her evening bag. A more private venue would be appropriate, she conceded, not for Ethan's benefit, but for her sons who deserved answers without an audience of strangers. The foundation director directed them to a small conference room adjacent to the ballroom. Rebecca entered first, the twins following closely, while Ethan trailed behind like a man walking to judgment. The door closed with a soft click, sealing them away from prying eyes and eager ears. Ethan collapsed into a chair, running trembling hands through his silver-streaked hair. For several moments, the only sound was his unsteady breathing as he struggled to compose himself. The confident CEO had vanished, replaced by a man confronting the consequences of choices made 15 years earlier. "Why did you never tell me?" he finally asked, looking up at Rebecca, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "You left absolutely clear that I wasn't enough for you. Why would I think our children would be?" Alexander stepped forward, his adolescent frame tense with restrained emotion. "You really told our mother that she was a burden?" The final word carried all the weight of a childhood spent wondering about an absent father. Ethan couldn't maintain eye contact with the son who questioned him. His gaze dropped to the conference table's polished surface. "I was arrogant, elitist, and an imbecile," he admitted, the confession hanging in the air between them. "There's no excuse for what I did." Andrew, typically the more reserved twin, moved beside his brother. "And now?" he asked, his soft voice carrying unexpected authority. "After 15 years, what do you expect to accomplish with this public confession?" "I didn't plan this," Ethan replied, gesturing helplessly. "But seeing you both, something inside me broke. The truth is that I lost everything that truly mattered that day in the church." Rebecca watched her sons handle this impossible situation with remarkable maturity. Pride swelled within her, nearly overwhelming the old pain Ethan's presence resurrected. Alexander studied Ethan with clinical detachment. The last quarterly report from Montgomery Tech showed a 22% drop in revenues, he observed matter-of-factly. You've lost contracts to Collins Digital in 13 different markets over the past 2 years. Ethan blinked, clearly startled by the teenager's precise business assessment. Yes, we're facing difficulties. Is that why you're here? Rebecca asked calmly, her voice level despite the accusation underneath. Losing in the market, losing your fiancé, needing a new narrative. Perhaps the prodigy sons you abandoned could be your fresh start. Ethan shook his head vehemently, tears finally breaching his composure. I deserve your contempt. I deserve all of this. But please believe I had no idea about the twins. If you had known what? Rebecca interrupted sharply. You would have stayed with me out of obligation? Tolerated us as a necessary burden for your public image? A soft knock interrupted them. An assistant cracked the door, speaking urgently. Mr. Montgomery, Ms. Collins, reporters are requesting official statements. The story is already breaking on social media. Rebecca stood, smoothing her Valentino gown with practiced hands. I believe we've had sufficient revelations for tonight, she declared. Boys, let's return to the hotel. Rebecca, please, Ethan implored, rising quickly. May I get to know them properly? Can I try to make up for the lost years? Andrew regarded the man who was his biological father, studying him as he might a complex mathematical problem. My mother worked 3 jobs while attending college and caring for us. She slept only 4 hours a night for years to build a company from nothing, always putting our needs first. Alexander completed his brother's thought seamlessly. The only thing we need to know is whether you would have done the same. If the answer is no, then there's nothing to make up for. Ethan stood silent, unable to claim he would have shown such dedication. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca paused briefly at the doorway. You know what's ironic, Ethan? You were right in that church. I wasn't enough for you. I discovered I'm much more. My sons don't need the Montgomery name to shine. They're already stars through their own merit. The following morning, Rebecca awoke to the buzz of her phone. The screen displayed notifications from every major business publication. Forbes had published a special online report, The Abandonment That Cost Billions, how Ethan Montgomery lost not just a family, but a technology empire. The article detailed how Collins Digital had outperformed Montgomery Tech in innovation and growth, with projections suggesting Rebecca could acquire her former rival within 2 years. Alexander knocked on her hotel suite door, Andrew close behind. Both had clearly been awake for hours, their expressions suggesting they'd spent that time processing last night's revelations. Are you okay, Mom? Alexander asked, the protective edge in his voice reminiscent of her own determination when facing challenges. Rebecca smiled genuinely. I've been preparing for that moment for 14 years, though I never expected it to happen so publicly. We researched him this morning, Andrew admitted. Montgomery Tech's security architecture is actually quite elegant in theory, just poorly implemented. That's oddly gracious of you, Rebecca observed, studying her sons with fresh appreciation for their ability to separate personal circumstances from objective assessment. As they prepared to depart for Logan Airport, Rebecca's phone chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen, then showed it to the twins. It was a formal communication from Ethan proposing a business merger that would reunite divided legacies. What do you think? She asked, genuinely interested in their perspective. The twins exchanged their characteristic communicative glance before Alexander responded. Mathematically, it would be more efficient to buy their shares when they drop another 15% next quarter, he analyzed pragmatically. I agree, Andrew nodded. Besides, I think we prefer building our own legacy. We don't need his. Rebecca tucked the phone away, feeling a final release from bonds she hadn't realized still held her. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about proving to herself, and now to her sons, that determining your own worth was more powerful than any external validation. As their private jet lifted from the tarmac, leaving Boston behind, Rebecca gazed through the window at the vanishing cityscape. Ethan Montgomery remained on the ground, diminishing until he disappeared, exactly like the power he once held over her heart and her life. The morning after the benefit gala dawned with crisp New England clarity, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rebecca's suite at the St. Regis. She stood wrapped in a plush hotel robe, scrolling through her phone as notifications accumulated by the second. Every major news outlet had picked up the story, transforming a private 15-year wound into headline news. Montgomery Tech airs shocking confession, abandoned pregnant fiancé, now billion-dollar rival, screamed the Wall Street Journal's digital banner. Tech's most explosive love story, how Rebecca Collins built an empire while raising Montgomery's secret heirs, declared the Boston Globe. Most telling was Forbes' special online report, The Abandonment That Cost Billions, how Ethan Montgomery lost not just a family, but a technology empire. The detailed analysis compared Collins Digital Solutions' meteoric rise against Montgomery Tech's recent struggles, complete with stark performance graphs showing intersecting trajectories, CDS ascending as Montgomery declined. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Alexander and Andrew stood outside, already dressed in casual designer clothes, their expressions suggesting they'd been awake for hours. "Are you okay, Mom?" Alexander asked, his protective instinct evident in the slight tension around his eyes. Rebecca smiled genuinely. "I've been preparing for that moment for 14 years, though I never expected it to happen quite so publicly." They entered the suite, Andrew carefully closing the door behind them. Both boys carried their tablets, screens displaying research they'd clearly been conducting since dawn. "We looked him up this morning," Andrew admitted, his voice characteristically quiet. "Montgomery Tech's security architecture is actually quite elegant in theory, just poorly implemented." "That's oddly gracious of you," Rebecca observed, studying her sons with fresh appreciation for their ability to separate personal circumstances from objective assessment. Alexander shrugged. "Facts are facts. Their conceptual framework for multi-layered authentication has merit. It's just their execution that's flawed," Andrew finished. "Their development team relies too heavily on outdated cryptographic methods." Rebecca felt a surge of pride watching them process this personal earthquake with such maturity. Where another teenager might have expressed rage or rejection, her sons approached even this emotional revelation with analytical precision. "How long have you known?" Alexander asked suddenly. "That we were—" "I've never lied to you," Rebecca said carefully. "When you asked about your father years ago, I told you he wasn't ready for family responsibility. That was true. But you never mentioned he was Ethan Montgomery," Andrew noted, his observant eyes studying her expression. Rebecca sighed, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "What would have been the point? He made his choice before you were born. I wanted you to build your identities based on who you are, not on rejection by someone who never knew you." The twins exchanged one of their communicative glances before Alexander spoke again. "The timing explains the inconsistencies in your employment history that never made sense. Why someone with your obvious capabilities was working as a cafe manager." Rebecca smiled wryly. "Nothing escapes you two, does it?" As they prepared to depart for Logan Airport, her assistant coordinated with hotel staff to manage the small crowd of reporters that had gathered in the lobby. Rebecca's phone chimed with an incoming message just as she finished packing her overnight bag. She glanced at the screen, then wordlessly showed it to the twins. It was a formal communication from Ethan, sent to her business email rather than her personal contact. "Rebecca, I understand your desire for distance given our history. However, for the sake of our companies and the technological advances we could achieve together, I propose a formal merger between Montgomery Tech and Collins Digital Solutions. This partnership would reunite divided legacies and create an unparalleled security enterprise. Attached is a preliminary valuation and merger proposal for your consideration. Ethan, what do you think?" she asked, genuinely interested in their perspective. The twins exchanged their characteristic communicative glance before Alexander responded. Mathematically, it would be more efficient to buy their shares when they drop another 15% next quarter. He analyzed pragmatically. Their stock is already down 12% in pre-market trading after last night. I agree, Andrew nodded. Besides, I think we prefer building our own legacy. We don't need his. Rebecca tucked the phone away, feeling a final release from bonds she hadn't realized still held her. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about proving to herself, and now to her sons, that determining your own worth was more powerful than any external validation. The drive to the airport proceeded in comfortable silence, all three processing the events that had changed their family narrative forever. Security escorted them through a private entrance, bypassing the main terminal where additional press had gathered hoping for comments. Aboard their Gulfstream G650, Rebecca settled into a butter-soft leather seat while the twins immediately opened their laptops at the conference table, already absorbed in their MIT presentation refinements. The practiced normalcy of their actions, this routine they'd established over years of business travel together, provided reassuring continuity amid yesterday's disruption. As the jet accelerated down the runway, Rebecca's phone lit up with a text from Sarah Chen, her original investor and now close friend. Watching the news. You okay? Call me when you land. Rebecca typed a quick response. All good. The boys are handling it remarkably well. Full debrief later. Once they reached cruising altitude, Alexander closed his laptop and moved to sit opposite his mother. If he reaches out to us directly, what should we do? The question caught Rebecca off guard. That's entirely your decision, she said carefully. You're old enough to make that choice for yourselves. But what would you want us to do? Andrew asked, joining them. Rebecca considered her answer thoughtfully. I won't pretend his rejection didn't hurt me deeply, but my feelings shouldn't dictate your relationship or lack thereof with your biological father. He's a stranger who shares our DNA, Alexander said matter-of-factly. Nothing more. DNA is significant, Andrew countered quietly. From a scientific perspective, knowing our complete medical history could be valuable. Rebecca watched their measured debate with a mixture of awe and melancholy. These extraordinary young men had processed in hours what had taken her years to reconcile. Whatever you decide, she said finally, we face it as a family, the family we built together. As they approached Chicago, the skyline came into view, a testament to human ambition and architectural ingenuity. Rebecca could see their building among the skyscrapers, the distinctive Collins Digital Solutions logo illuminated against the afternoon sky. From her current vantage point, it seemed impossible that she had once stared up at those same buildings from the confines of her car, homeless and pregnant, wondering how she would survive another day. The pilot announced their descent into Chicago Executive Airport. Rebecca gathered her thoughts, mentally transitioning back to CEO mode. Tomorrow would bring board meetings, development reviews, and the normal rhythms of running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. The Boston incident would need addressing. A carefully crafted statement was already being prepared by their communications team. As the wheels touched down on Chicago soil, Rebecca's phone buzzed with an alert from her financial advisor. Montgomery Tech's stock had fallen 17% by market close, faster than even Alexander had predicted. Several major clients had already announced reviews of their security contracts. She closed the notification without comment. Ethan's public collapse wasn't her victory to celebrate. It was simply the natural consequence of choices made 15 years ago, now coming full circle. While observing Chicago through the jet window, Rebecca smiled at the thought of what enough truly meant. Not external approval or social validation, but the inner strength that had allowed her to build not just an empire, but a legacy of resilience and dignity that her sons would carry forward forever. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.